Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's Wednesday, April 15th of 2026. While the Islamabad talks may have hit a wall, the diplomatic machinery in Washington is shifting into a higher gear, with Cairo at the center. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati is currently on a high-stakes tour of Capitol Hill, meeting with everyone from Senate Foreign Relations Chair James Rich to Secretary of State Marco Rubio. On the table, a secretive 20-point plan for Gaza and a desperate attempt to salvage the US-Iran ceasefire. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Europe is facing a strategic nightmare. As President Trump muses about a naval blockade of Iranian ports and simple military maneuvers, European leaders are scrambling to avoid being dragged into another immoral war. They're balancing a terrifying reality. How do you secure the Strait of Hormuz when your few remaining destroyers are busy hunting Russian submarines in the North Atlantic? I'm Henny Saif, and let's answer some questions. Welcome back. Foreign Minister Abdulati's visit to DC isn't just a courtesy call. It's a mission to prevent a total regional collapse. Beyond the US-Iran friction, Secretary Rubio revealed a 20-point plan for Gaza that suggests a level of granular coordination we haven't seen in months. Egypt is positioning itself as the indispensable mediator, the only power capable of talking to the Gulf, Tehran, and the US simultaneously. Joining us to bridge these two worlds is Mr. Ahmed Khattab. Mr. Khattab, you specialize in the intersections of MENA politics and global citizenship. Today we're seeing Egypt try to act as the adult in the room, while Europe is realizing it might not have enough ships to protect its own backyard, let alone the world's energy jugular. Now, Secretary Rubio teased this 20-point plan for Gaza. Given your work on citizenship and the MENA region, is this plan likely to about security governance, or are we looking at a massive migration and reconstruction framework?
Hello, Mr. Henny, and thank you for inviting me to join. I'm always happy to join. So I think Egypt here is trying to play a role whereby there is a coherent grand strategy for the Middle East. Egypt is concerned about the peace plan in Gaza and its continuation. It is also very much concerned about the big elephant in the room, so to speak, the war between the US and Israel on one side and Iran on the other. And I think what's important for Egypt here is to continue to act as a force for stability and peace, and to act as a voice of reason when there are seemingly very abrupt changes in tone and policy coming from all sides, really. We have seen in the past weeks contradictory statements coming out of Iran with regards to targeting the Gulf countries, or when it comes to even the US and Israel, sometimes within the same day, by its most senior policymakers, including the US president, regarding Iran. So it could be that there are moments of hope with regards to negotiations, with regards to a ceasefire, and then there are other moments where it seems like the war is going to continue for much longer than just a few weeks or even months.
Mm-hmm. Well, our foreign minister, the Egyptian foreign minister, Badr Abdulati, described the Egypt-US partnership as a pillar of regional security. Now, in a Washington that currently values loyalty tests and transactionalism, how does Egypt still maintain its leverage without being seen as picking a side in the Trump-Iran feud?
Well, I think Egypt has very much space here to fill when it comes to leadership in the region and its ability to convey that international peace and security, which is not only something that the Middle East as a region demands, but increasingly the whole world. And of course, the Middle East as a region is relevant to international peace and security when it comes to its energy supplies, when it comes to its strategic location, etc. But I think Egypt here has a very important message to convey, which is that international peace and security is not only about politics or security. It's really about wider definitions of those concepts, economic security, the ability of economic destabilization stemming from abrupt changes to flow of such important strategic goods. We're talking about the flow of energy. We're talking about a very important waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, that is being disrupted at this moment, and how these things can themselves act as destabilizers for security in the world, right? Mm-hmm. For security within states themselves. And so Egypt conveys this message in a way that is not only relevant for itself or the region, but also for the world. And I think Europe here is very much on board when it comes to such a message. And I think this is really the next phase that Egypt and multiple regional partners are going to move towards. And that is to sort of neutralize or set aside such key passageways for international trade, like the Strait of Hormuz, from conflicts that may erupt between adversaries in the region.
Mm-hmm. Well, Egypt is maintaining contact with Tehran while hosting U.S. lawmakers. Can Cairo successfully pitch the negotiation as the most effective path when the U.S. president is publicly attending UFC fights and posting about blockades?
Well, I think the U.S. is maintaining a strategy of maximum pressure. So the U.S., of course, here is quite aware that the Iranian regime has not yet reached a breaking point. The Iranian regime, for sure, has been under immense pressure. The U.S. and Israel have done considerable damage and continue to do so, in fact, to Iran, to Iranian infrastructure, to the Iranian military with its all different branches, ones that are formal or paramilitary as well. But at the end of the day, there seems to be a sustained and quite existent interest on the side of the U.S. and, of course, more timidly so, Israel, to continue to negotiate with Iran. And I think there are mediators who are actively working on this. Egypt is very much involved, of course, Pakistan, Turkey, etc. And I think all these states all have a common interest in ensuring that there are no further spillover effects that come from this conflict. As I said, knowing that there are quite clear destabilizing forces that could come with such disruptions to the global economy and its ramifications for local economies as well.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Khattab, the talks covered more than just Iran. Is Egypt's diplomatic outreach in danger of being spread too thin as it tries to solve the crises in Sudan, Gaza, and Lebanon all at once?
Well, I think it certainly is a difficult time. I think it is very much a time where there are multiple crises. Many times they're interacting with each other. There are times where one seems to be of higher priority. But at the same time, there is also, as I said earlier, this seemingly coherent grand strategy of ensuring that conflicts remain contained, conflicts are minimized. There is a de-escalation of violence in the region, to the extent possible, of course, and always a role, I believe, at least for Egypt to play when it comes to the partners, whether regional or international, that could play a role in speaking to those different sides within the conflict. And of course, in the case of the U.S. is very much involved firsthand in the Iran war, and of course, as a supporter of Israel when it comes to Gaza as well.
Mm-hmm. What about the secretive 20-point plan for Gaza? How much of a priority is it for the U.S. right now?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think it's as much of a priority as it was before the Iran war erupted, of course. I what I really worry about here is all these negotiations, all these plans, all these talks hitting roadblocks. So it seems like when it came to the Gaza peace plan in the past months, things had slightly moved forward. There was some progress being done. But then there was this major obstruction or obstacle whereby Hamas had clear intentions not to disarm in the direct and quick way that the US or Israel had expected or at least hoped for. What also worries me is we might be hitting similar obstructions when it comes to negotiations between the US and Iran, especially when it comes to the nuclear program, enriched uranium stockpiles, the ballistic missile program, etc. These are all things that those different parties are going to want to see major compromises happen on, but at the same time, the other parties, so for example, Hamas in this case, when it comes to Gaza, or Iran when it comes to the current war, will have to get something for in exchange. They would demand major concessions from the other parties, and I think this is the main reason why we see higher pressure levels from the U.S. For example, the blockade that's currently being put on Iran when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. And this is all to sort of force Iran's hand or even twist its hand to give all these concessions on its side without the US giving equivalent concessions or major concessions in return.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Khattab, please stay with us as we move to discuss Europe's scramble to find its own Hormuz fix and whether a continent already spread thin by Russian threats can actually afford to play sheriff in the Gulf. Europe is in a scramble. While Trump talks about a simple naval blockade, European Union leaders like Kaja Kallas and Emmanuel Macron are looking for a Hormuz fix that doesn't involve a shooting war. The military math is brutal. The UK's HMS Dragon is in the Med after a drone attack on Cyprus, while German frigates are taking over NATO duties in the North Atlantic because the Royal Navy is out of ships. Back to you, Mr. Khattab. Now, Trump wants to blockade the Iranian ports to stop the tolls. Europe wants a deconfliction mechanism with Iran's consent. Is there any middle ground here, or are the US and its European allies now fundamentally at odds over maritime law?
Well, I think Europe is right to point to sort of an urgent need at this point for an international sort of maritime security framework or regime for the Strait of Hormuz, right? We do see this being repeatedly expressed by Europe. I think all states that are very much with vested interests in ensuring a steady and smooth flow of energy from the Gulf area uh, very much have to be on board, right? So I think there is opportunity here for Europe to find common ground with states like China, with states like Japan, South Korea, etc. All those states really have a very strong interest in ensuring that there are stable energy markets, that there is a stable supply of oil flowing from the Gulf region.
Mm-hmm. Well, the article mentions the psychological wounds in the UK and Spain from the 2004-2005 bombings. Is Europe's lack of appetite for this war a matter of military capacity, or is it a deep-seated fear of domestic blowback?
Well, I think it also has to do with expectations in terms of how the US ought to behave, what are the motivations for US foreign policy actions in general on a larger scale, and specifically when it comes to the Middle East. I think there is some degree of distrust between former partners in this case, so between the US on one side, on between and then Europe on the other side. I think there are clear expressions of regarding this when it comes to US efforts in the Gulf area. I think Europe did move, but very clearly on its own, signaling that it is not part of this offensive on Iran, and that Europe is once again here trying to ensure that de-escalation is really its strategy, is its way forward, that it is a reliable partner to talk to when it comes to ensuring that this war does not escalate further, and that there is rather a sustainable end to this war. Because once again, negotiations ought to happen, de-escalation would happen eventually, uh, ceasefires could be extended, but if there is no strong framework to ensure that in the future, even if conflict re-erupts, uh, Hormuz or the international energy market is not really a pressure card, is not really something that states use to negotiate with others, is something of vital importance. And I think this is really Europe's objective and what they're trying to achieve in their last movements in the last couple of weeks.
Well, Europe is looking at the Gulf. Russian submarines are conducting covert operations in the Atlantic. Now, if Europe diverts its few minesweepers to the Strait, are they effectively handing the keys of the North Atlantic to Moscow?
I think Europe is in a rather sensitive situation here. I think it's highly problematic for Europe. I think they cannot afford to completely sideline sort of the most pressing issue and continues to be a major pressing issue for Europe, which is Russia's policies, Russian military actions in Eurasia specifically, as it comes to Ukraine and other areas around Europe. But I think it's also important that we realize how much Europe can feel the pressure of what's happening in the Middle East, specifically when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. And that's why I believe this is what Europe is trying to do. They're trying to coordinate, they're trying to move as a bloc. We also see statements that are signed by other partners signaling that they're willing to work with Europe, specifically Canada, Japan, and others.
Mm-hmm. President Macron is trying to bring in Japan, India, and South Korea into the equation. Is a coalition of the willing viable if it doesn't include the US, or is this just a diplomatic theater, to show they aren't following Washington's lead?
What I think is as ironic as it sounds, if the theater is lacking a main actor, the main actor does not seem to sort of act within a coherent storyline, then we ought to bring one to the stage. And I think this is what Europe is trying to do. If the US so far does not seem to be acting within a clear vision of how it sees this war unfolding, of how it sees it end, of what exactly are its objectives that it wishes to achieve through this war, then Europe could really offer sort of some sort of vision, some sort of structure, some sort of grand plan in terms of what can come out of this war, what could change, what are the things that we have learned as lessons that we can then take, institutionalize in a certain framework, especially when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz and security there, and move forward from that. Mm-hmm. But I think that Europe is very much sensing the absence of this American leadership, specifically when it comes to international energy markets and when it comes to navigating this war and sort of taking it in a specific direction to achieve certain objectives.
Will they be able to?
Well, they can hope. I think this is much easier said than done. But at the same time, I think time is in Europe's benefit to some extent. So, I mean, as the war continues, the painful effects, the pressures of the war become increasingly felt by the American public. And of course, the American public exerts pressure on American policymakers. As time passes, we begin to see a greater willingness, and we have seen this already by the Americans, by the Israelis, etc., to negotiate, to start to review sort of the objectives that they have put for this war, what they're willing to compromise on, what are their non-negotiables. And the same goes for Iran. And so I think that Europe here is positioned in such a way to play on these changes, right? Play on these developments in a way that further stresses what really is important, right? And as we said, and as you had rightly said, there are all these international partners like India, Canada, Japan, South Korea, etc., that would also exert some sort of pressure on the US and others in terms of here are the things that we want to ensure we achieve after this war is over.
The German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, insists on a UN Security Council mandate. In this current geopolitical climate, is that even a possibility? Or is it just a polite way of saying, we aren't coming?
Well, I think Germany is quite interested in ensuring that there is some sort of international legitimacy or international backing through existent institutions. I think the UN is in a difficult position in the sense that it seems like American policy, at least in the past year or so, has been intentionally trying to marginalize the UN. And I think this is where the problem here is. We haven't really seen much UN involvement when it comes to the Iran. And I think the problem here lies with American policy itself. American policy in its current phase, in its current moment, believes that it has the capacity to act on its own, that international organizations, of course, most major of them being the United Nations, is only a sum of the political wills of those member states. And so at the end of the day, if the US and Israel can coordinate an effort to achieve their own interests as states, there's very little the UN can do.
Yes. Mr. Ahmad Khattab, thank you very much for joining us to navigate these turbulent waters. Diplomacy is often the art of finding a fix for a problem that was created by a lack of foresight. As Cairo builds its bridge and Europe hunts for its minesweepers, the world waits to see if the adults in the room can keep the strait open before the ceasefire expires. I'm Hani Asif, and that's all the time we have for today's broadcast of Q News. Thank you for joining us.